here with Dr. Irvin Pedro Cohen of the LISC Jacksonville. Good evening, Pedro.
How are you?
All right, so thanks for being here. So
My pleasure.
Tell me a little bit about LISC and what is it that you do in the community?
LISC is an acronym, obviously, for Local Initiative Support Corporation, and what I like to tell people is we do exactly that. We support the initiatives that are being led by the community. However, our sweet spot as it relates to most of that work centers around affordable housing and really leaning heavily in on the acquisition of BIPOC wealth, and BIPOC again is another acronym for Black, Indigenous people of color. So we really try to support those efforts.
So normally when we hear the term affordable housing, people think of public housing or subsidized housing. What makes the work that you do in affordable housing different than what we consider to be traditional public housing?
Really, I like to think of affordable housing as what you can afford to pay. Our work just centers around under-resourced communities, and particularly for me, is disrupting the cycles of poverty that we see concentrated in those communities. We try to really reintroduce housing that or to a sense, we try to make sure that our communities are destinations where people want to live rather than when they get some semblance of resources they want to flee. So we do a lot of work in that space, again, around affordable housing and focusing in on BIPOC wealth.
So in the Jacksonville community in particular, what areas of town do you think provide the most potential for new affordable housing, and how does that stack up against where people consider to be traditional or Black communities today? Because, you know, when you and I were growing up, we considered our communities, our neighborhoods on the north side to be, quote, middle class communities. Those starting to change a little bit, and people consider those not to be areas where people will want to raise middle class families.
Well, you know, I'm really glad that you asked that question, because we are in Jacksonville launching a program called Project Boots, and Project Boots will focus in on historic East Side. We're taking 5 families, taking them through a 12-month course of what does it mean to be a good neighbor? What does it mean to be to live in these communities? What does it mean to be, you know, an activist in these communities? We're looking at that, and then we're bringing back essential workers. So we're focusing in on nurses, teachers, service people, police officers, firefighters, the like. We're bringing them back into the community and having them build their homes in that space. But we're doing it with the caveat we're going to provide some down payment assistance and closing cost assistance in the process. So I'm real proud of that kind of work, but we're focusing in on, again, those under-resourced communities that people generally found themselves leaving, specifically those that are in close proximity to downtown. We're doing that, so we're going to start September 11th with our first cohort of folks, and they will be moving, hopefully, by August this time next year. They'll be moving into their homes in historic East Side.
So we've seen some shifts in communities such as Springfield, right? It took a while for Springfield to sort of take off. In the beginning, when it was trying to reclaim itself, they were depending on a lot of grants and subsidies from the city, right, from local government. And how does that fare with the work that you're doing? And where do you see those opportunities, and which specific communities do you see those potentially working the best?
Well, I think all of those, all of the communities that LISC does its work in, whether it's historic East Side, whether it's Durkeeville, whether it's North Riverside, whether it's Moncrief and Myrtle, and what's called the District of Soul, we are really targeting those communities to do the bulk of our reintroduction of, again, you know, solid middle-class, career-oriented people back into those neighborhoods. I think that we've done, over the course of time, we've done those communities a disservice by just strictly concentrating, I'm not going to say necessarily poverty, but under-resourced people in those communities. And so what you, as a kid, you walk out and you don't see anyone that education necessarily has worked for. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to reintroduce people like yourself, people like me back into these communities. So for me, the end goal is a kid can walk out the block and he could see a teacher, he could see a serviceman, he could see a police officer, he could see a firefighter. And then now he has the capacity to connect the dots of what the outcome of education can do for them.
So I'm glad you brought a reference that you and I are from the community, right? The Northwest Jacksonville area.
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting that LISC is, the CEO of LISC is from the community, right?
Right.
Where the work is most needed is being led by someone who's from the community.
Right.
When you drive around town, what do you see? I mean, the good and the bad.
I see the possibility, but I think those people who are leading several other efforts around the possibility may be a little disconnected from what needs to really happen. I think the beauty of my work is I was able to sell it to our board. Our board, in turn, was able to get behind it and get funders behind what we're trying to do. And I think that when the beauty that I bring, I get to reshape the narrative of what's happening on the ground in our communities from someone who is indigenous to that community. And so I think that has been the beauty of what we've been able to do thus far, is develop a narrative and then allow me to have the support and the resources to be able to lean into that narrative.
So we've had a lot of recent weeks and months, we've had some consciousness around what can be done in underserved communities.
Right.
Based on some injustices that have gone on nationally and locally.
Right.
And how has that impacted the work that you've been trying to do? Have you seen people wanting to make conscious or intentional investments in the work that you're doing? And I guess my question back to that would be, how did your board respond to your efforts to dig into this work?
Well, I think, to answer your first question, I think people have now recognized that doing nothing is not an option. And I think also what they have recognized is that having circular conversations amongst their peer group has not necessarily led to the change that they want to see. And so I'm very fortunate that my board took a chance on what it was and the vision that I had when I walked into the room. And that vision really came from a spot of I live, I work, I play in the very same communities that you want to do the work in. And not only do I bring a vision for what could be, I also have the historical knowledge of what used to be. And, as I sold to my board and the community stakeholders who support the work of LISC is that, I understand what better can be. And they took a chance on hiring someone who was indigenous to that community, and they rallied around the vision. And what you're seeing right now is not only our work centered around producing new homes in those neighborhoods, but it also focuses in on the preservation of those new homes and the preservation of homes that are already existing in the community through our home repair program. But it also will focus in on protecting those homes, meaning protecting those assets through our heirs property work.
Okay, so now we talked about the people who make LISC. What about the people in the community? How are you connecting with them, and how are they informing on the work that you're trying to do?
So, I think for me, the work has been done on the ground. What I like to tell people, particularly those who still live in the community, is that I'm your return on investment. And the work that I'm doing is not to displace you, but to build up around you. And so the work that we're doing specifically in the heirs property space and the housing repair space really lends itself to the people who are on the ground in those very communities. So not only are you seeing people who live on the ground in those communities, homes being repaired, but you're also seeing us clear title for some of those folks at the same token, so that now they have a generational asset. And then we're layering that with bringing new residents or residents who are familiar to the neighborhood. Moving back into historic East Side or Durkeeville or Moncrief and Myrtle or any of the other communities that LISC does its work in is not for the faint at heart. It's not for everybody, and I get it. Just because you are a person of color doesn't necessarily mean you want to revisit some of the trauma that some of these neighborhoods have levied upon you. And that's okay with me. But there are people who that look like you and I, that has had some success in their lives professionally, that want to move back into their neighborhoods. You have to give them a product that they want. And so we've worked really hard in all of those spaces to give people a product that wants them to move back into the neighborhood. But at the same time, we also have to work with our grandmothers and our elders in the neighborhood whose houses may have fallen into a level of disrepair. And so we have a home repair program that goes simultaneously. So all of our work is not done in a vacuum by itself. It's all done on the same plane as we try to really, what I call disaggregate poverty in many other neighborhoods that you and I grew up in.
Okay. Do you have any large projects on the table that the community should know about or be aware about that they can watch out for or support?
Well, yeah, I would like to think that our work that we're doing around Ayers property, it has the capacity to change the context of property. Because if you take a neighborhood like Durkeeville, 85% of those homes in that neighborhood are not owner occupied, meaning that the person who's living in the house don't necessarily have title to the work, to the property. So we're doing work on the ground in those communities, going door to door, knocking on the door saying, hey, we can help you clear the title of this house so that it becomes yours. So I think that work has the capacity to change. And then I think large scale work that we're doing that really, really, really is going to be a game changer for us is the work that we're doing around the devaluation of people of color's assets, mainly their homes. I think that has the capacity to be just literally a model that we could use across the country as it relates to the valuation of Black assets.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Irvin Pedro Cohen, thank you for
My
joining
pleasure,
us.
my man. My
Thank you to
pleasure.
be here. All right.
Thank you.